There are places in Cornwall where the land seems to end but the story does not. A church in a wooded place, a river mouth below, old stone surrounded by older earth, trees leaning in as if they know something. And in the spring of 1976, 2 children looked up at the Tower of Mawnan church and saw something that should not have had wings. Not an ordinary bird, not quite. The shape was too large, too upright, too human in the wrong places. A dark figure above the church tower with vast wings, clawed feet, and a face that seemed to belong to the night itself. The girls ran, and whatever they saw, bird, beast, shadow, trick or terror, would become one of Cornwall's strangest modern legends. A creature sometimes called Britain's answer to Mothman, a winged omen at the edge of the Helford. In Cornish, this creature has another name, Cowendon. Simply the Cornish word for owlman, the same story wearing its own language, but most people know it by the English name that stuck, the Owlman of Mawnan. And this is not only a question of what 2 children saw, it is a question of what happens when a place, a witness, and a storyteller all meet at the wrong moment. Because sometimes a monster is not born in the woods. Sometimes it is born in the space between a scream, a drawing, and the person who gives it a name. Mawnan Church does not stand in the middle of ordinary life. It stands apart, high above the place where the Helford River meets the sea, wrapped in trees, looking out over water, boats, tides and weather. This is not simply a pretty church in a quiet parish, it is a verge. Church and woodland, river and sea, Christian stone and older earth, the living path and the graveyard path, the everyday world and the thing just beside it. Long before the Owlman had a name, the place itself already had atmosphere. St. Mawnan and St. Stephen's stands in a landscape that feels layered, the kind of place where old shapes in the land make you wonder how many beliefs have settled there. And perhaps that matters, because some stories do not arrive just anywhere, they need a place that's all ready for them. They need old stone, trees, wind, a tower, a path where the light fades quickly. Before the Owlman appears, Mawnan is already the kind of place where something might. The story begins on the 17th of April, 1976, Easter weekend. A family from Lancashire were on holiday in Cornwall. 2 sisters, June, aged 12, and Vicky, aged 9, were said to have wandered near the church. It should have been harmless, a holiday walk, a bit of exploring, a churchyard, trees. The kind of place children are drawn to because it feels secret without being forbidden. But then they looked up. Above the church tower they reportedly saw a huge winged figure, owl-like but wrong. Large enough to be frightening, human enough to be worse. Some versions describe dark feathers, pointed ears, clawed feet, glowing eyes. The girls fled back to their father, Don Melling, in terror. And the detail that gives this story its first real sting is not simply what they claim to have seen. It is what happened next. Don was apparently disturbed enough by their fear that he cut the family holiday short by 3 days and drove home. And the bizarre thing for me is that this sighting was said to have happened during the day. Not midnight, not mist, not a ruined lane under a bad moon, daylight. Which somehow makes it stranger because daylight is supposed to behave itself. After the sighting, June reportedly drew what she had seen. A child's drawing is a strange kind of evidence. It is not a photograph. It is not a footprint. But it carries something else. The shape of an experience before adults have fully explained it away. A huge birdman, wings outstretched, dark feet dangling beneath. Something both simple and dreadful. There is a reason these drawings matter in monster stories. The Woollerton children drew their gnomes. People sketch impossible things because language fails them. A drawing says, "I saw this," or "this is the shape my fear took." And sometimes in folklore, those are almost the same thing. The Owlman's first body may not have been feather and bone, it may have been pencil on paper. And then the Owlman enters the orbit of a man who could not have been more perfectly designed for this story if Cornwall had summoned him from the sea mist with a drumbeat. Tony Doc Shields, artist, magician, performer, monster hunter, prankster. Self-styled Wizard of the West. If you have already watched my film on Morgor, you have already met him. Shields was there too, somewhere between witness, conjurer, publicist and theatrical weather system. It was Don Melling who first told him the story. Shields later described it in a letter. A holiday maker from Lancashire, he wrote, had told him about something his 2 young daughters had seen. A big, feathered birdman hovering over the church tower. The girls were so scared their family went home 3 days early. Shields could not speak to the children directly, their father would not allow it. Don gave him June's drawing, and that was enough. Shields named the thing in the sketch, he called it Owlman. Did Shields investigate the Owlman? Did he amplify it? Did he shape it? Did he help create it? Those questions sit at the centre of the whole story like a black feather on a church path. And the answer may be yes, somehow to all of them. The story did not stay private for long. It surfaced that same year in a small locally circulated pamphlet, mostly about another monster entirely, titled Morgor, the Monster of Falmouth Bay. The author was credited as Anthony Mawnan Peller. No one has ever come forward as Anthony Mawnan Peller. Jonathan Downes, the researcher who has spent more time on this case than almost anyone, says he knows who it was. He has never said. He has only said pointedly that it was not Shields. Look closely at the name though, and it starts to feel less like an author and more like a clue left on purpose. Mawnan, the place where the birdman was seen. And Peller, close enough to Pellar to raise an eyebrow. In Cornish folk tradition, a Pellar is a cunning person, a charmer, someone who deals in curses, cures, protections, and the working of small local folk magics. so the name almost reads like a little spell of its own. A man of Mawnan, a magical operator, a masked author standing at the edge of a monster story. Whoever wrote that pamphlet, they signed it with a name that already told you what kind of tale you were entering. The Owlman did not simply appear in print, it appeared wearing a disguise. The year matters. 1976 was a strange year in Cornwall's modern folklore. Morgul was being reported off the coast near Falmouth Bay that same season, a long-necked thing in the water blamed by some local fishermen for bad weather and poor catches. Shields did not simply report on Morgul, he performed it. The same year, he had 2 members of his coven swim naked in the Helford River, hoping to lure the creature into the open water. The newspapers loved it. The following year, he produced his own photographs of the Loch Ness Monster. This is not incidental colour, this is a pattern. A man who summoned sea monsters by ritual photographed Nessie to order, and was at the very same time the main channel through which a birdman over a church tower reached the public. The newspapers were hungry. The old appetite for monsters had not gone away. It had simply learned to pose for blurry photographs and arrived by local rumour. Morgul rose from the bay. The Owlman rose above a church tower, and between them stood Tony Shields, part artist, part trickster, part occult showman, part man at the pub who knows exactly how to make the story just a little taller. It would be easy to dismiss everything at this point, too easy. To say Shields was involved, therefore it's all nonsense. But folklore is rarely that tidy. A hoax does not always destroy a legend. Sometimes a hoax is how a legend learns to walk or fly. A few months later, on the 3rd of July, the story returned. 2 14-year-old girls, Sally Chapman and Barbara Perry, were camping near the woods around Mawnan. By then, the first Owlman story had already begun to circulate locally. Both girls had read it. This is important. The creature had entered the local atmosphere. People knew there was something strange associated with the church. The idea had already taken wing. And then in the trees came a sound. A hiss. Not wind. Not a gull. Not the normal creak and whisper of branches. Something close. Something with intent. The girls reportedly saw a large figure standing between the trees, like an enormous owl. Grey feathers, pointed ears, red eyes, dark talons, described almost like pincers. At first they laughed. They thought it might be someone in a costume, a prank, a local trying to frighten them. And that is such a human moment. The mind reaches for the ordinary first. A man in a suit, a joke, someone messing around. Then the thing rose into the air. This is where the story changes. Because a costume can stand in the dark, but it should not fly. The girls screamed. The creature lifted into the trees, and now the Owlman was no longer merely something above a church tower. It had come down into the woods, closer to ground level, closer to us. What most retellings leave out is what happened the very next day. On the 4th of July, a young woman named Jane Greenwood, walking near the same stretch of woodland, said she encountered the creature too. She had not been camping with Chapman and Perry. She described it independently, man-like, standing with a wide mouth, eyes that slanted and glowed red, and claws she called black and crab-like. Some accounts say it appeared silvery grey that day rather than a darker feathered figure of the earlier reports. 3 witnesses across 2 days in the same patch of trees. That is either the strongest evidence that Owlman has ever produced, or it is the clearest sign of how fast a story can spread once a name has been given to it and a pamphlet has put that name into circulation. A church, a drawing, a pamphlet. And within months the woods themselves had a reputation. Anyone who walked through them carried that reputation in with them, whether they meant to or not. So before the story grows too many wings, let us pause. Strip away the red eyes. Strip away the title. What can actually be held? A father's report, a child's drawing, a family who supposedly left Cornwall early, a pamphlet. Teenagers who had already heard the first story, another young witness the following day, a magician with a known appetite for monsters, later reports, some named, some anonymous, some impossible to properly test, and a church that has never quite shaken the shape from its tower. That is not nothing, but it is not a clean case either. It is not the kind of evidence that builds an animal, it is the kind of evidence that builds a legend, and that may be the most important clue of all. The Owlman is often treated as Britain's answer to Mothman. And it's easy to see why. A winged humanoid, red eyes, sudden appearances, young witnesses. A creature that feels less like an animal and more like an omen. But the comparison only goes so far. Mothman belongs to headlights. Owlman belongs to candlelight. Mothman belongs to roads, bridges, headlights, industrial ruins and American disaster myth. Mothman feels like warning from the edge of concrete and electricity. The Owlman belongs somewhere older and stranger, a Cornish church, a wooded headland, the mouth of the Helford River, old earth beneath Christian stone. Mothman had the bridge, Cornwall gave its winged omen a church tower. The Owlman does not feel like a creature from science fiction, it feels like something from a church carving. Something that should be hunched above a medieval doorway, half bird and half sin, watching generations pass below, or something older still. A thing of the trees, the river mouth, the graveyard edge, not quite cryptid, not quite ghost. But standing close enough to all three that the categories begin to blur. And Cornwall loves a blurred category. Cornwall practically puts blurred categories in a pasty and serves them warm. There is an older shadow over Mawnan, and it does not begin in 1976. In 1926, the Cornish Echo carried a strange local report. 2 boys chased through the woods near the church by what the paper called a large and ferocious bird. Escaped only by taking cover behind a steel grating. No red eyes, no church tower apparition, no name yet, just 2 frightened boys and a paper willing to print the story. It might have stayed exactly that, a thin, forgotten local scare, except for what some accounts say happened next. The story goes that this odd little report reached the ears of 2 visiting painters. In 1937, the surrealist Max Ernst is said to have come to Mawnan with a small group of friends, amongst them his lover at the time, the young English painter Leonora Carrington, drawn, so the story goes, to the tale of the thing in the woods. They are said to have performed a kind of ritual there, an attempt to summon a being that was part bird, part human, a therianthrope, a creature caught permanently between two forms. I want to be honest with you about this thread because it deserves honesty. It survives today mostly in later retellings, strung together well after the fact. There is no diary entry, no letter, no exhibition catalogue standing behind the story it can point to. It may be true, it may be myth, it may be folklore. A story that grew backwards to meet the Owlman, the way folklore often does. And this is one of the strangest echoes in the whole story, totally unverifiable, absolutely irresistible. And for those of you who know how much I love Leonora Carrington's art, you will understand why I could not leave this story outside the churchyard gate. Because even as legend it fits this place of unsettling precision, and it's a great story. Ernst's own reoccurring alter ego, the figure he painted again and again across his life, was a birdman he called Lop Lop. Half himself, half something with wings, watching its own pictures from inside the frame. And Carrington's excellent work is soaked with the same borderland imagery, hybrid creatures, beings caught mid-transformation between woman and animal, animal and spirit, hyenas in dinner dresses, women with the faces of birds, creatures that seem to have walked out of a dream, ritual and private mythology all at once. So picture it, even just as a story Cornwall tells about itself. Two of the century's great painters of half-human, half-animal beings walking into these same woods beside this same church, following a scrap of newspaper about a bird that frightened two boys. It's probably complete myth, but I actually hope it's true because it's a brilliant story. After 1976, the story did not go quiet. In 1978, two further sightings were reported in June and August. And in 1986, on Halloween, Shields returned to the church. Newspapers reported that he had been conducting some kind of ritual inside St. Mawnan and St. Stephen's, attempting by his own apparent design to summon the creature he had named 10 years earlier. He said almost nothing about it afterwards, only telling Downes years later that he had done a few bits and pieces inside the church. The showman walking back into the scene of his own legend to perform it one more time. And again, somewhere near the edge of the story there is the shape of Shields. Not always as an author, not always as a witness, but sometimes simply as atmosphere. As if the magician never quite leaves the stage even when the lights have gone down. In 1989, Downes interviewed a young man he calls only Gavin, who described a creature about 5 foot tall with high ankled legs, large black feet with only 2 visible toes, grey-brown colouring, and eyes that glowed. Downes is careful to point out that this witness, unlike almost everyone before him, had no connection to Shields. In 1995, the night editor of the Western Morning News in Truro received an anonymous letter. It came from a marine biology student visiting from Chicago on the last day of an English holiday. She described walking a narrow wooded track near the old church at 9:15 in the evening, and seeing 30 meters ahead what she called a vision from hell. A birdman thing, a ghastly face, a wide mouth, glowing eyes, pointed ears. In 2009, a 12-year-old girl named Jessica Wilkins became the most recent named witness, and the first of the new century to put her name to a sighting near Mawnan. Each report is harder to hold than the last. Some are anonymous, some are second-hand. Some feel like the echoes of a story already famous enough to haunt itself. And that is the problem with Owlman. The first reports are already wrapped in uncertainty. After that, the creature becomes even harder to separate from the legend. Is someone seeing the Owlman, or seeing something strange through the Owlman? A barn owl glimpsed at dusk becomes something larger when the mind already knows what might be waiting in the trees. A noise becomes a hiss, a shadow becomes a shoulder, a wing becomes an arm, a face becomes a mask. That does not mean the witnesses lied, it means stories change the way places are seen. Once you know a church has an Owlman, you never walk past it quite innocently again. And then there are stranger reports, not sightings of the Owlman exactly, but sightings that seem to gather around the same place, as if the church itself sits at the centre of something restless. In 1996, a woman reportedly saw a ball of light floating above Mawnan Church. Then, in 2003, two teenage girls were said to be sitting in the church car park late at night, listening to music in their car, when they saw something above the church, a glowing orange orb, a globe of light pulsing in the darkness. It hovered there over the old stone tower, silent and impossible, watched for a while by the two girls below, until, without warning, it simply vanished. No wings, no claws, no red eyes in the trees, but still, something in the air above Mawnan Church. And that may be the most interesting part of the Owlman story, because once you strip away the feathers, the headlines and the hoax arguments, you are left with a place where strange things keep being reported. A man-bird above the tower, a creature hissing in the woods, a ball of light over the church. Perhaps the Owlman is not the whole mystery. Perhaps he is only the shape the mystery sometimes chooses to wear. Of course, there is a simpler answer to all of this. An owl, a real owl. The cryptozoologist Carl Schucker has pointed specifically to the Eurasian eagle owl, a genuinely huge bird with a wingspan that can stretch past 5 feet, ear tufts and a stare that can look almost deliberately human in low light. There is one complication. In the 1970s, the species had no established wild population in Britain. Any eagle owl seen near Mawnan would itself likely have been an escapee or a release, which is its own small mystery riding on the back of the bigger one. Owls already have something uncanny about them. They move silently. They appear without warning. Their faces are uncanny. Their eyes catch the light. Their cries can sound like something being torn out of the dark itself. Imagine it, a pale face catching light between branches. Wings opening wider than expected. Talons dropping beneath the body. The head turning too far, too silently, too knowingly. For half a second the brain does not see a bird, it sees a thing. A barn owl crossing a graveyard at dusk does not need much help becoming supernatural. It has already done half the job before your imagination even arrives. And if two children saw such a bird unexpectedly near an old church tower while alone or frightened, it is not hard to see how the image could grow. An owl becomes a giant owl becomes a man owl becomes the Owlman. This may be the cleanest explanation, but it does not entirely end the story. Because the question is not only what did they see, the question is, why did this become the thing people remembered? Cornwall has owls everywhere, but it only has one Owlman of Mawnan. Then there is the other explanation, a hoax, a performance, a piece of theatrical folklore. The occult historian Gareth Medway has made the case as plainly as anyone. Looking across the witnesses connected to Shields, in this case and others, Medway noted a pattern that is hard to ignore again and again. The testimony seems to come through very narrow doors. Shields himself, friends of Shields, relatives of Shields, people who reported only to Shields and to no one else. Shields lived in the borderland between art and trickery. He blurred painting, magic, myth-making, publicity, hoax and performance into one long strange act. He seemed to enjoy the uncertainty. Was it real? Was it staged? Was it a joke? That is the energy Shields brings into the Owlman. And yet Downes, who counted Shields as a close friend for decades, offers the counterweight. Gavin in 1989 came to him with no known Shields connection at all. If that account is genuine, then whatever started in 1976 did not stay inside the hoax, it got loose. It started happening to people who had never met the magician who named it. Because if the Owlman was a hoax, then it was not a failed monster story. It was a successful piece of modern folklore. It escaped. It entered books, websites, documentaries, pub conversations, paranormal lists, and the strange mental map of Cornwall. People still talk about it. People still go to Mawnan Church and look at the trees. A fake monster that survives for 50 years has become real in at least one important way. Not real like an animal, real like a ghost story, real like a warning. Real like a name that changes how a place feels. And from doing my Morgul documentary, I respect Shields. He might be a performer and a known magician, but he's a fascinating character. The first witnesses were sisters on holiday. The second and third were teenagers alone in the woods. And in folklore, children often stand at the boundary. Not because they are foolish, children notice things adults filter out. They also sometimes clearly see what adults have learned to ignore. A child's terror is not proof of a monster, but it is proof of an experience. Something happened to those girls. Whether that something was an owl, a prank, a shadow, or a genuine encounter with the impossible, it left a mark. And then adults took that mark and built a legend around it. That is often how folklore works. A child sees something, an adult names it, a community repeats it, a landscape keeps it. Owlman might have been slightly sensationalized, but I don't believe it to be a hoax, or Tony Shields to be a hoaxer. He was simply the first to investigate. The mystery remains. There is something especially powerful about the Owlman being seen at a church. Churches already carry layered meanings: sanctuary, death, judgment, memory, bells, bones, old boundaries, old parish boundaries. The living speaking to the dead every Sunday through stone and ritual. Then add an owl, an old bird of the night, silence, omen, wisdom and fear. Then add the woods, the river mouth, and a magician. Then add a pair of surrealist painters decades earlier already obsessed with bird-headed beings. Then add 1976, the year Cornwall seemed temporarily determined to produce monsters. The result is not just a cryptid case, it's a perfect little myth engine. The Owlman is frightening because it appears where categories collapse. And perhaps that is why the Owlman feels so powerful as an image. Because the owl is not just a bird. Across many cultures, it has carried a strange double meaning. It is wisdom, but also warning. It is sight, but sight in darkness. It belongs to the night, to silence, to the edges of things. In the ancient world, the owl was sacred to Athena, goddess of wisdom, a creature of sharp perception and hidden knowledge. But elsewhere, owls have been feared as omens, messengers, watchers at the boundary between life and death. In more shamanic and esoteric traditions, the owl becomes a guide of the spirit world, a symbol of transition, inner vision, initiation, and the ability to see beyond illusion. He appears at the edge, the thing that looks back from the dark and crosses those boundaries. And powerful folklore does cross those boundaries. A headless horseman, a sea serpent, a tiny gnome in a toy car, a fairy funeral seen at dusk, a piskie leading a traveller in circles. Folklore is often obscure and bizarre until the light changes. Then it becomes ancient and a part of us. So we return to the church above the Helford River. No monster now, only the tower above the trees, the old graves, the river below, the path through the wood, birdsong somewhere in the branches, and the Owlman nowhere to be seen. It became a legend, the legend became part of the place. For a few strange moments, something winged passed over Mawnan Church, and after that the woods remembered. Because the Owlman, real or not, for some still haunts this place. It needed only a tower, a witness, a name, and the right kind of darkness. The Owlman of Mawnan. Cowandan, a bird at the edge of belief, a shadow above the church. Cornwall's winged omen, still waiting in the trees. And maybe, just maybe, it waits there still. Another doorway in the abyss, and now waiting in the wings. All the chance at the wheel of fortune. Another road to Another life to fill the cup, another pathway ending. And I want to fly. And I want to run. And I want to fly. And I want to run. And I want to fly. And I want to run. And I want to fly. And I